first event of the MBA Politics Society, which is the mission of it is just to bring interesting speakers and have interesting discussions about political ideas and specific legislation and maybe even the presidential election with students at MBA and then also members of the community. So our main goal is to bring interesting people to MBA that allows us to have discussions that we wouldn't ordinarily have just within a classroom setting. And so today we have Congressman Jim Cooper. So Congressman Jim Cooper, he currently serves as a United States Congressman representing the 5th District of Tennessee. He served the 5th District since 2003. And he previously represented the 4th District from 1985 to 1995. He was born in Nashville. His father was the governor of Tennessee, and he received the Morehead Cain Scholarship to attend University of North Carolina, where he earned a BA in History and Economics. He went on to be a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, and then he received a Harvard law degree as well in 1980. So after he received a Harvard law degree, he went on and worked in a practice for a few years, but then immediately jumped into Congress and ran for election. And ever since then, he's been working as a politician and has quite a bit of experience in this area. He's on a number of committees in Congress and subcommittees. Some of these committees are the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the Committee on Armed Services, and on several subcommittees such as Government Operations and Energy Policy, Healthcare and Entitlements, Strategic Forces, and the Tactical Land and Air Force Committee. So all these committees do very specific things and author specific legislation that Congressman Cooper may be able to tell you about, in addition to how voting for a specific presidential candidate, for example, may affect how Congress people act and how the American people should be dealing with things in their day-to-day lives. He also is often described as the House's conscience, a lonely voice for civility in this ugly area, and a tart-tongued moderate who seeks bipartisanship on fiscal matters and other issues in a polarized political climate. And it is my honor to introduce Congressman Cooper today.
I'm honored to be with you. I'm glad you have a politics society because I want to ask each one of you to be in politics, to get involved. It doesn't have a great reputation. Your parents aren't necessarily going to be excited if you tell them you're interested in politics. But America cannot be great unless we have great leadership. And you cannot delegate these jobs. Politics has long been known as the profession of C students. I was not a C student. I think you need able people. When our country was founded, some of the best people in America had names like George Washington, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, go down the list. But today, the best and the brightest in America deliberately avoid politics. And I can't blame them for that, because it's kind of a scuzzy business. But we've got to make it better than that, because America cannot be number one. We cannot remain the greatest nation on earth unless folks like you are number one, in whatever field you choose. But some of you better get involved in politics. Now, I think we're relatively lucky in Tennessee. We have great U.S. senators, Lamar Alexander, Bob Corker, who are outstanding individuals in their own right. They could get a real job in the real world. They have, they've done it. But they've also chosen to get into politics. Many people who are elected today in the U.S. Congress could not get a real job in the real world. In fact, they're lucky to be in Congress. I had one colleague who in an Armed Services Committee hearing was worried if we put too many soldiers or weapons on Guam that the island might tilt over. That's a little scary. We had a chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and that's basically military intelligence. He did not know after 15 years on the committee the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslim. Like the average American might not have to know that, but if you're on the Military Intelligence Committee, you should know things like that. So I'm in favor of competency testing for my colleagues. That would clean out 2/3 or 3/4 of the whole group. Now, of course, my colleagues hate that idea. But in a democracy like ours, we have to first have good people run so that you have a choice when you go to the ballot box. And I congratulate MBA because we had, I think, the greatest percentage participation from MBA of any school in Davidson County. That was awesome, what y'all did in that voter registration drive. So you got the spirit, but we need to make sure there's follow-through. My son Jamie graduated from MBA a few years ago. My son Hayes went here. This is a great school, but somehow the government of America, or the government of Tennessee, or the government of Davidson County needs the benefit of your talent. So Don't just go be a hedge fund manager in New York or something, or some other comfortable, lucrative career. Help serve the nation. You're elbowing your friend there. Is he about to be a hedge fund manager? See, I'm not against those things, and good people need to do that, but don't discriminate against your own government, because that's what systematically happened over the decades. And so many people have such low expectations of their elected officials, they're really not surprised when they do horrendous things. So let's have a better standard than that. And generally speaking, Tennessee has had a better standard. Particularly in the U.S. Senate, we've distinguished ourselves. No state in America, certainly no state of our size, has gone from the Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker. Jim Sasser would have been Senate Majority Leader, except we voted him out of office right before his ascension to power. And then we had Bill Frist, MBA's own Bill Frist. 3 Senate Majority Leaders in a row. So our position as a border state, our position as being basically sensible, centrist, center of America people, this stands us in good stead when it comes to leadership of our great country. There are a lot of issues to talk about. This is a particularly discouraging year to try to recruit people into politics, because I don't know about you, I get afraid to turn on the TV. I hate all the stuff that's going on. There's seldom been a lower level dialogue than we have today. It's basically turned into professional wrestling on TV. A couple of things have happened. We have merged celebrity and politics, and you get so used to being entertained that you hate it when somebody talks policy. So I'm delighted that MBA students might be interested in the issues. But that's not what sells advertising on TV, and that's our commercial TV model. They would have all advertising, the TVs would, if they could get away with it. The news is a money loser for them. So they try to make news a bridge between advertisements. Anything that will glue your eyeballs to the screen a few seconds longer is worth tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to these folks. And they've adopted all these snake charming techniques to hold your attention. There's never just a talking head anymore. Usually there's a flag waving slowly in the background. Well, that holds your attention a little bit longer, and that sells more ad dollars. So how do we get good information? How do we get good news? First, remember that most people, most human beings, we are human, don't like to live in a fact-based world. Fiction has always outsold to nonfiction. And the great poet Yeats said, "Tread softly because you tread on my dreams." Most people don't want you to tread on their fantasies either. So I try to live in a fact-based world. I try to make an accurate diagnosis of a problem. And then once you do that, the treatment options are pretty obvious. But Karl Rove, the modern political consultant, kind of pioneered the fact that make your own alternative reality. Doesn't matter what the truth is, just peddle a good story and you'll get action. The plural of anecdote is often policy, whether the anecdote is true or not. So the ability to tell great stories is an awesome political power. So we live in this crazy time. Don't let it be the new normal for America. This, I hope, is an aberration. I hope we'll go back to sensible presidential races. What motivates me in politics is really issues, trying to do the right thing. I want carved on my tombstone what was carved on the tombstone in Tombstone, Arizona. One of the cowboys out there, I forget his name, it's like Joe Hill or something. He done his damnedest. He tried his hardest. You won't always succeed, but at least try. I do not want carved on my tombstone he was a chicken or an ostrich or any other sort of bird species like that. And so many of my colleagues are just in office for one reason, because it's the best job they've ever had, as I discussed, and then they want to keep that job. So we'll do almost anything to get reelected, including sometimes sell out the country. That is traitorous behavior, but it is shocking how the urge to be popular is overwhelming, even if you know that people are wrong. This is classic. I'm sure you've been taught this at MBA. Edmund Burke, the letter to his electors at Bristol. This was hundreds of years ago. He was asked the question whether he owed his electors his slavish obedience or his best judgment. He wrote them back that he owed them his best judgment. He was promptly defeated in the next election. If you just want a cipher, if you just want a proxy, you would take a public opinion poll every night and then American opinion would blow with the wind. That's not leadership. That's not looking over the horizon. That's not long-term strength. So I think what you need are folks, we really don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. It's a representative democracy. You vote on people who are supposed to actually lead and know more and do their homework and research, because the people of America are busy. We're a hardworking people, and you cannot focus every day. Like, I try to read 4 or 5 newspapers a day and go way beyond that, because being not only a nerd, but kind of a super nerd, I'm actually supposed to know what I'm talking about. And my central responsibilities, it was a little garbled in the introduction, I'm the top Democrat in America, at least in the House of Representatives, for all of America's nuclear issues and our satellite issues. And those are probably the 2 most important and 2 most taken for granted things in our whole country. Because, you know, 1 nuclear bomb will ruin your whole day. You know, you can't find your car keys or your golf hole without GPS. And, you know, this is totally taken for granted. Both are miraculous and sometimes devilish technologies, but they actually determine a lot of how the world works. So who's going to do homework on stuff like that? I don't think you want C students in that department, because both of those areas are really required to be 0 error. Lots of things we could talk about. I'm looking forward to your questions. I hope you're formulating them right now. I think this year, 2016, is a great year for young people to get involved in the election. Some of you are probably already feeling the burn, because at least according to the TV, you know, young people are seduced by Bernie Sanders, which is kind of an interesting thing. Now, he's not a bad guy, but he represents a state, Vermont, that is so different from Tennessee. How many of y'all ever been to Vermont? A handful. Now, it's not a bad state, but it's just like totally different. And they did a rating of all the U.S. senators the other day. The Lugar Center did it. Dick Lugar was an excellent centrist Republican senator from Indiana, and they rated the senators. And the 2 most extreme U.S. senators in a body that's unusually extreme, the 2 most extreme senators are Ted Cruz on the right and Bernie Sanders on the left. And yet most Americans say they're tired of the extremism and the fighting, and these are the folks who are leading in both political parties. So see, oftentimes we're our own worst enemies. Now, it's an attractive spiel. And I don't know if you saw Saturday Night Live the other night. Bernie was asked, and it was really Larry David, who does a superb impression. He's almost as good as Tina Fey is at doing Sarah Palin. Larry David was saying, "Young people love me. Why? Because I'm just like they are. Why? Because we all have big ideas. And just like young people, I have no idea how to accomplish anything." And see, that's a satire, a lampoon, but there is an element of truth in that. Now, Bernie is best known for the fact that for the last 30 years he's been a socialist. He's refused to be a Democrat. We're too conservative for him. And now he gets to be a Democrat in the last 4 or 5 months because he chooses to be. Essentially what's happened in this election, both parties have been subject to a hostile takeover by folks who are not even party members. Donald Trump's not really a Republican. Bernie Sanders never really been a Democrat. But because our rules are so loose, they're able to claim that now. By the way, if Trump is elected president, you don't have to be worried about him being president long, because he'll soon leave us for a younger country. You know. But back to the Bernie thing, Bernie is best known for being a socialist, and like, I sure hope they teach you economics. You know, if not here at MBA, at least take a lot of courses in college on economics, because, you know, we shouldn't worship money, but money is important to understanding how the world really works. The Panama Papers are a fascinating revelation of how the corrupt leaders of the world have funneled most of their money from Putin to Xi through that little bitty country so it can be put in safe havens so they can betray their own countries. So understand how money works. And see, socialism, we shouldn't be absolutist about this. It's not all bad. You know, TVA, where this electricity is coming from tonight, is a socialist enterprise. It's a government-owned utility, unlike in most any other state in America. And we got that because in the 1930s, private power companies didn't want to serve the people of Tennessee, And it took government investment, government intervention to make it happen. The electrification of rural America was one of the great accomplishments of government. It's something we should be proud of. Smoky Mountain National Park is also kind of a socialist thing. Social Security is more obviously. So there are these things that, are good. The most popular health insurance in America by far is called Medicare, which is a single-payer Canadian type program. But yet people think they don't like this stuff. So not all of it is bad, but overall Bernie is like, yikes. So it's fascinating to see young people attracted not only to the oldest candidate, either party, but also to some of the weakest economics. So, but the phrase has long been, in the Democratic Party you fall in love, in the Republican Party you fall in line. That's a stereotype. But the key is to focus on the real issues that are happening. And it's possible for America to take big detours in the wrong direction. And we have to be careful that we're not doing it this time. One of the things that we take for granted today is that government gets to shut down periodically and sometimes randomly. That's kind of a crazy thing. Like Congress is almost shut down this year. We will work this year for only 54 full days. We will vote less than the Tennessee legislature votes. And why is that? Because the party in charge doesn't want to have many recorded votes because it might be embarrassing, they might lose office because they're basically chicken. Periodically in recent years, our American government has shut itself down for a few days just because of political disagreements. Right now, in a budget sense, we're living under this thing called the sequester, which is having such a harmful effect, at least on our military, that testimony from our generals and admirals has said that no foreign power could hurt us in a way that we're hurting ourselves. Why do we do this? But there's so many other examples of self-inflicted wounds. Former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said that the greatest threat that we face today is not from any foreign power like Russia or China. It's not from any terrorist group. It's our own budget deficits, our own inability to live even vaguely within our means. And why do we do that? Because most people either don't understand money or just want a diet of endless ice cream and forget vegetables like broccoli and kale and all those things that aren't nearly as much fun to eat, but we know are essential for a healthy diet. So those are a few thoughts. Hopefully I've provoked some of you. I mentioned this is a great year to get involved. All the campaigns are looking for help. Even if you work for Bernie Sanders, I won't hold it against you. It's really important to get involved and start getting some experience. Oftentimes the most important races, though, are not the presidential races. They get all the TV attention, but there are going to be a lot of important local races. The most important elected positions are actually the local ones here for the state rep, state senate. We already had our metro elections last year, so you're too late for those. But these are incredibly important positions. Our legislature was given an award last night as the most conservative legislature in all of America. Yikes. I don't mind conservatism, but you don't want to be extreme in any regard. This is kind of going off the deep end. They've now made the Sniper Barrett 50 caliber the official state gun. They're about to make the Bible the official state book. They debated the merits of skunks as house pets. Like, surely there are more important topics than that. Now that gets the media attention, but like, come on guys, we can, because as I say, generally Tennessee has done better than most other states. So why don't we open it up now? Questions, comments you've got? And let me give you one other thing. I'm not just doing it to you because you're MBA students, but I've given it to everybody, and it's a real tribute to the civility of the folks in this area. My cell phone number is 714-1719. It's right here. Anybody wants to call me, because oftentimes people have a question or a comment they don't want to reveal to the other people in the room. There's oftentimes a lot of peer group pressure in high school or other places. It happens with adults too. So 714-1719. And if there are any doubters, you can go ahead and try it right now and see. I'll prove to you it works. So I keep this all the time, and the folks in this area are so nice. My colleagues in other districts in America are terrified of the thought of giving out their cell phone number. They do not trust their own folks. And folks in this area, I've only gotten like one call after 10 o'clock at night, and one obscene phone call, and it wasn't even a very good obscene phone call. Like, This is an amazingly polite area. So that is awesome. So anybody want to start with questions or answers or comments? Yes, sir.
In your opinion, as a congressman, will there always be such a deadlock over like the issue of gun control?
Well, it depends on what your issue of deadlock is. It's largely been determined by a very new and novel Supreme Court decision, and this was done before Justice Scalia died. And that really, for the first time in our 230-year history, defined gun rights more precisely than had ever been defined before. Congress basically hasn't legislated on gun issues for a decade or two. So you could say that we had gridlock for 230 years, and then finally the Supreme Court, if you're pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun, did the right thing. Or if you're anti-gun, you could say, well, we lived in an ambiguous situation, but a situation tolerant of gun regulation, and then the Supreme Court slammed the door shut. It all depends on your perspective. The key is to have an understanding of the real issues, and that's what so many people don't want to put the mental effort into understanding. And you may be a constitutional originalist, in which case the interpretation of the language at the time would control, but that's kind of hard to figure out because back then they had like flintlocks and circumstances change. So more people have a more flexible interpretation of the Constitution where, one of the famous justices said that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. It's got to work for a successful modern nation. And we've got to make it work. And sometimes it's a constitutional amendment that does that, but that's a very awkward process. It's only been done, 26, 27 times in 230 years. That's that's pretty a stable document as far as documents go. So if you're focusing on gridlock, you're much better to argue budget issues than gun issues. Yes, sir.
You talked about how you thought there's some people who just try to hold on to power too much. Do you think there should be term limits for senators or congresspeople?
Question is on term limits. I often get that. Guess what, folks? We already have term limits every 2 years. That's if you bother to show up and vote. Many people are too lazy and they don't even know. I go to Rotary Club. My colleagues at the Rotary Club don't know whether I run every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. We need more civics knowledge in this country. You got to know how the machine works. And one of the worst things we could do would be to, A, let people be so lazy that no matter what turkey or clown is in office and say, oh, I don't care, he'll be out of there in 6 or 8 years anyway. Or B, what really happens, if you look at it empirically, almost every retired congressman in the world does what? Lives in Washington and becomes a lobbyist. I think that's not a good thing. That's a revolving door. They give up on the public interest, they get their pension, they go work for the special interests. That's not a good thing. Now, lobbying is a First Amendment right, but for a former congressman to essentially betray their public trust and go do that, that's not a good thing. But that's become a way of life. And a lot of my colleagues feel entitled to that. Even the dumbest of them make 4 or 5 times more than they ever made as congressmen. And essentially what we have in America is a dual government system. There's the one that's constitutionally mandated, which is essentially free, but you're already paying for it. And there's the one that private interests pay for on their own. And they pay their reps many, many times more than we get paid. And there are many more of them. There are 30 to 60 lobbyists in Washington for every person like me. 30 to 60. Making many times more than what, and the people of America choose. And right now, they choose the lobbyists who tell them exactly what they want to hear. Whatever industry you're in, those folks are filling your ears full of the fact that, talk about selfishness and greed and all those things that are fun to hear about, and very little about patriotism or sacrifice or anything like that. And I think the job of a good elected representative is to ask the John F. Kennedy question. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But see, that's a spinach question. That's not an ice cream question. And most people are out there, selling ice cream right now. Yes, sir.
You mentioned government accountability and people selling out to big companies, big interests, wealthy donors, whatever. How
how is it possible to increase accountability for government officials in order to perhaps, have them more forwardly say their donors, and why or why not is $1 equivalent to free speech?
Well, at the end of your question, you get into the constitutional issues. Our court has, in my opinion, strayed pretty far from common sense. First, with the 1976 decision of Buckley v. Vallejo, in which they said that corporations are people. No, that was more money as speech. And then with Citizens United, a more recent decision, they said corporations are people. Well, corporations are wonderful. They're an essential element of capitalism. They're a way to raise money and limit risk. But they are not human beings. And Abraham Lincoln said it best when he said, this is government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not of the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporation. Because a company like Exxon Mobil, at least when oil prices were good, could take a fraction of 1/4's earnings and buy the entire American electoral process from president down to city council. That's not a good thing. I think human beings should decide their own fate. And the corporate influence, it's not always a bad influence. It's fine when corporations balance each other out, but sometimes there's often the corporate voice and no human voice. So to be alert to that, the people have the power if they bother to use it, but see the way it works now, hardly anybody votes, even fewer people vote in primaries, and even fewer people are informed about who's the best candidate. And they've essentially given up trying because oftentimes there's not even one semi-decent candidate on the ballot. And if you live in a state like that or an area like that, you gave up a long time ago and you just put all your faith in some libertarian dream, and that can be very satisfying, but it's not real. Yes, sir.
What do you think of the growing social inequality in America, and what would you do to stop it?
What do I think of growing social inequality in America? That's a big theme, a la Tom Piketty in his book. It is true that we have the highest disparity in incomes that we've had since the 1920s. America is a little bit different. It sounds like you've got an English accent, an egalitarian Europe, but really England has been more class-oriented than America could ever dream of being. We don't believe in titles here or accent classification, things like that. America has always been torn because we want equality in voting, but we also want reward for merit. Now, I do think a couple of things are undisputed. Probably in our tax code and other ways, we've probably given undue benefits to the financial sector. That they don't really make anything, but and I've been in finance, and it's a fascinating, lucrative area, but you're not really making anything. You're more moving money around. So it should be rewarded, but should it be unduly rewarded? You saw this with a company like GE. By far the most lucrative arm of GE they've now had to dispense with, which was GE Capital. Ford Motor Company made much more money off Primus auto finance than they did off making cars. So, and you know, our entire economy in this country, 70% is based on consumerism. Not investing in the future, but buying as much stupid stuff as you can buy right now because it feels good doing it. That's not a long-term economic strategy. So economics is really good and powerful, but you really need to understand, and for those of you who are expert in economics, I'm giving a really simplistic description. I can go deeper. But the idea that we'd want to start class warfare in this country or pull successful people down to lift other people up, I think a better approach, again, is described by John F. Kennedy's words when he said, a rising tide lifts all boats. We need to give everyone enough of an education and to keep them healthy enough so they have a chance to compete. And then we need a safety net for those who can't. But there has to be vigor. Keynes called it animal spirits in the economy. That's what works. Schumpeter called it creative destruction, because capitalism is about great success and it's also about cleaning out the dead wood. And that's one problem with government, because government never has a spring cleaning. You know, one of my favorite senators was the now retired Republican Senator Tom Coburn, who did a lot of great reports on government stupidity. There are 40 different federal job training programs right now today, and none of them work. And why doesn't Congress clean out the 38 worst ones and fund the 2 that are slightly better? Because We only meet 54 days a year, as I mentioned, and most of my colleagues are not paying attention at the hearings because they're just there to get on a TV camera by asking a loud question. You know, kind of the modern paradigm of the House of Representatives is what my friend Joe Wilson shouted out at a Barack Obama State of the Union speech when he yelled out, "You lie." Well, that was rude and a total violation of House rules, but it made him $2 million in 2 weeks because angry white men in pajamas started emailing him money. And even his unknown opponent made $1.5 million. So see, the insult machine is a way to print money. And my colleagues aren't totally stupid, they at least get that, and they start doing the same thing. So that's one reason you've heard this sort of insult fest in the presidential campaign. Yes?
How do you feel about the current superdelegate system within the Democratic primary process?
Well, superdelegates were put in as a reaction to the McGovern era in which the regular people took over the party and got us a party nominee who lost 49 states. We have another candidate running today who will lose us 49 states. And it feels good at the time, it feels idealistic, but I'm a practical centrist. You know, I'm part of the establishment. Go ahead and hate me, but I like stuff that works. And one of the easiest ways to destroy American capitalism would be if we had popular elections for CEOs of companies. Then they'd all become movie stars and performers and start doing stupid things. When what you want in real leadership is somebody who's competent and calm and fair and all those good but boring qualities. See, in the TV world, remember, don't merge celebrity and politics. Even in his time, Abraham Lincoln was viewed as too ugly to be president. And that was before television. But talk about a brilliant mind. And talk about an attentive audience. He and Douglas in those debates, the audience would stand for 3 hours in the hot sun to hear a nuanced argument about expansion of America and extension of the slave doctrine. And those are subtle arguments that he makes. You know, and people today, it's sound bites and Twitter feeds and like, let's not dumb down America too much. That really worries me. Yes, sir.
Do you think it'll be beneficial for America's economy to lower the marginal tax rate below 20%?
Well, I'm a deficit hawk, so I don't want to do anything to blow up our economy. And let me do my usual pitch, and I've made this everywhere. People don't invite me out anymore because they're tired of hearing it. The official debt for America is $19 trillion, which is appalling because it's basically doubled in the last 10 to 15 years due to the current generation's irresponsibility. But see, that's just the cash debt. The credit card debt is at least 60 to 80 trillion, and according to Bloomberg Businessweek, probably more like 210 trillion. Like, if that's even remotely true, and I think it is because that's real accounting like every business in America has to use, then we're in a world of hurt already. So lowering marginal rates is like handing out ice cream. Unless it can spur even greater growth. And see, everybody who lobbies us say, give me a little money now and I'll pay you more later. Well, if that had happened, we wouldn't have a budget deficit. So the first thing to do is to be responsible. And in general, lowering marginal rates is a great way to spur growth. If the company doesn't try to move offshore like Pfizer just tried to do, a $160 billion merger with Allergan, just so they could pretend their headquarters was in Ireland, when we're the only country left on earth that pays full retail prices for their drugs. The Irish people don't, the British people don't, Europe doesn't. No, and they're going to betray us like that? This is one of the fundamental issues we face. You know, corporations, I think, need to be kind of patriotic too, and don't just sell us out. And in my opinion, and my former classmate used to be head of Pfizer, they were doing exactly that. Who else has questions, comments? Yes, sir.
This is changing the topic just a little bit.
No problem.
But being the congressman from Nashville, do you hear of anything that's moving the music industry as far as like syncing or any copyright laws?
Well, the greatest challenge the music industry faces are from people like you who steal their music. Let's be honest. They even did a survey of Christian youth, and they steal just as badly as the, I suppose you can call them the heathen youth. You know, you know, and in a way, you're not to be faulted, because if people just put stuff on a shelf, you're going to pick it up. And you know, one of the early companies that led the ripoff was based here, and the guy was a deacon of his church. Like, oh my God. So, and new business models are a good thing, and we probably need to get the music industry to update its business model, because labels and, you know, now they've all become multinational conglomerates. We need, the key is to have talent rewarded and let them make enough money so that more talent will come. I'm selfish, I would love to keep as much of that talent as possible here in Nashville. And so far, despite the tension in the new business models, we're achieving that. But it's something we've got to continually watch. Now, the copyright laws are an antique. They're administered by the Library of Congress. Some of them go back almost 100 years. It's prehistoric, but so many of those things need to be fixed up. But due to the power of regular radio and some other folks like that, broadcasters in general, we haven't even been able to get a solution that would enable our artists here today to draw on the royalties that have already been stockpiled for them in Europe for decades. We could have an unbelievable distribution of wealth if we just meshed our laws with those internationally. Now, we don't want to cave into lower standards, but oftentimes we've had the lower standards in America. So it's a very complicated issue. Intellectual property, you know, the greatest source of wealth in the world is not land or stuff or anything like that. It's what's in your brain. So protection of IP is probably the greatest challenge we face, because most other nations are happy to steal us blind, but in the music case, our own children are stealing us blind. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on gerrymandering, and do you think Congress will ever get rid of it?
Well, gerrymandering is always unpopular with a party that's out of power. I've had the bill in Congress, and before me it was John Tanner, a Tennessean, to stop gerrymandering whether we were in power or not. Because gerrymandering is a terrible thing. But the Supreme Court, when they came in with a one-person, one-vote standard, did not add a standard of any sort of geographical coherence. So recently, there's some hope. They just threw out a district in North Carolina that's not any wider than I-81, which is about 60 feet wide for about 100 miles, just so they could put more people who vote alike. But the fundamental issue in gerrymandering, and people need to understand this, is we've effectively lost the secret ballot in America. And that's a constitutional right. Now, it's not completely lost, but computers are so good today that the whole technique of modern campaigning is not persuasion, getting undecided voters, it's base mobilization, the people who are already for you. And they can ferret those out of their apartments and homes like you wouldn't believe. Today, if you work for one of these campaigns, you'll be given a sheet when you go down the street knocking on doors. And that sheet is so specific because they will tell you to only talk to one spouse in the house or skip 3 houses, because they know exactly who their voters are, because they know how you voted. Because all voting records now are computerized, so you know exactly which primaries, exactly which general elections you participated in. And you merge that data with things like magazine subscriptions, and you have a 95 to 99% chance of knowing exactly who your people are. And if it were legal, they'd give you a candy bar, they'd give you a fifth of liquor if you just go out and vote. Now that part is illegal, but the way of, you know, inviting you to rallies or giving you a free download, or there's a lot of stuff going on that we need to guard to make sure democracy works. So the fundamental issue in gerrymandering is loss of secret ballot. And when I raise this in meetings in Washington, I'm like the skunk for both picnics. Because right now, the Republicans like gerrymandering because it works for them. Like in a state like North Carolina that's almost 50-50, they have something like 11 Republican seats and 3 Democratic seats because of the way they did the map. Computers and evil intent are a very a powerful weapon. But the thing that enables it to happen is we know how people vote. If we didn't know that, then gerrymandering would be more random. People wouldn't be able to do it as effectively. I'm proud of the fact that I've never represented a district that wasn't a swing district. The districts I've represented have always been able to be won by some in either party. And that's a good thing, because that leads to real competition, and that also encourages me to be nice to everybody, regardless of their politics. Yes, sir.
If you had to support a current presidential candidate, who would you support and why?
Well, I'm for Hillary Clinton. I'm not super excited about it, but I think stable, sensible. You know, Bill Clinton did a lot of bad things when he was president, but it was a pretty good time for the country. You know, the things I would have changed. And, you know, one of the terrible things we do is we tear down all of our presidents in either party. We give them what is already the hardest job of the world, and we make it impossible. And that's why their hair grays before our eyes. Because, you know, if a Malaysian airliner goes down in the South Indian Ocean, I get calls the next day, well, why didn't we have a satellite looking at the South Indian Ocean? Well, because there's nothing that happens there most of the time. When the the oil spill in the Gulf happened, I got calls all the time. Where is the backup oil rig that should be docked in Houston so that we can pull out $1 billion thing and plug that hole? Well, the U.S. government doesn't do oil rigs. We rely on the private sector to do that. You know, it's amazing what people expect the government to do. And to be the poor president, you know, it's amazing they ever get a half hour of peace and quiet in their whole life when they're in the White House, because we make it the impossible job. And we treat other countries as if we have a complete right to interfere in their affairs. And now that we have drone attacks in about 50 countries in the world, it is astonishing, because you can push a button right now at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas and take out a bad guy, you know, in Yemen and in a bunch of other countries. It's astonishing, the reach and power of the government.
I couldn't quite hear you. How do I feel about intelligence?
Yeah, secret intelligence stuff like U2 is just flying and it would see almost everything.
Like
air
the-
on top of you,
like
both
the
on
U2?
and stuff, and drones nowadays. And how do you feel about the regulation of those
Oh.
things?
The U-2 is a very old and fragile airplane that figured prominently in the Cold War when Gary Powers was shut down in Russia. So that technology, man, you're dating yourself. That's something your grandfather would ask about. You know?
I was just saying, like, you know, just trying to do a broad spectrum.
Well, in general, the first duty of American government is to protect the people of this country. And the intelligence agencies, and people focus too much on the CIA, there are 26 intelligence agencies. And we need them to be not just super capable and strong, but we need them to be the best in the world. And increasingly, we're challenged in cyber. And America has been very slow to react to this challenge, particularly the Internet of Things, because it was published recently that even a small dam in upstate New York was a target of a foreign hacker. You know, as even our refrigerators and toasters are connected to the Internet, we have to be aware of the reach of malicious software. Already, ransomware is proliferating. I don't want to go too deep in those. Important and necessary weapon. The Stuxnet virus that allegedly was inserted into Iranian centrifuges that were trying to develop nuclear weapons, and we don't know why, which country did it, but the fact that it happened is kind of an amazing thing, kind of a wonderful thing, but weapons like that can easily be turned against us too. So it's vitally important that y'all be cyber literate. This is one of the opportunities for your generation, not just to use this amazing stuff, but to really understand the mechanics, how it works. And this is one of the glories of the age, to use that in a constructive fashion. Yes, sir.
What do you think about the current situation with the Supreme Court nomination?
You probably couldn't hear me asked about the current Supreme Court situation. I think it's embarrassing that the senators refuse to even meet with Merrick Garland, because if you've read anything about Merrick Garland, he's one of the most distinguished current judges in America. He is a bipartisan person. Now, he's not perfect, and you can certainly criticize this ruling or that, but to not even give him the time of day It basically means we will have a dysfunctional Supreme Court for 3 years. Because if this year they won't even say hello, next year the new president, whoever it is, will not ruin their whole presidency by bringing up a Supreme Court nomination. Because this is Congress's favorite food fight here. Ever since the Bork era, which is really an embarrassment and got Congress on the wrong track, this is the best way to make free politics or free TV time so you don't have to raise as much money for your re-election. By trying to look like a hero, not by doing anything positive, but by stopping somebody. And so, right off the first year of the new presidency, so it would be in the second year of the new presidency, so, and that the hearings, once they get started, take months. So you're basically talking 3 years. This is the sort of discontinuity in American government that I find appalling. No sensible organization in the world turns itself off for no good reason. But our government does it periodically because people want to showboat on TV. This should not be a frequent occurrence. Who else has a question? Yes, sir.
Less for this upcoming election, more for the past 8 years. What have you thought about Obama's about his term as president?
Well,
What's your
most people will tell you that journalism is the first draft of history, and you only find out what really happened once you get a little bit more perspective and removed. For example, one of the most vilified presidents in American history was Harry Truman. You know, he looked like a failed haberdasher from Kansas City after Franklin Roosevelt had been president. He was so elegant and so successful, and the judgment of historians actually credits Truman today with a remarkably successful presidency. So it's hard for us this close, but I do think that it's fair to say that Obama has probably been more systematically vilified than any modern president. There's never been a birther movement before. And that's about as delegitimizing as you can get. I wish we lived more in a fact-based world, and then people would focus on, you know, but it's so much fun to believe false stories. I still get it today. I have people call the office saying, "You got to get that Muslim from Kenya out of there." I have a colleague from North Carolina, a very respectable businessman. To meet him, he'd be an MBA dad. And he's all over TV. He's like, "We got to send that Muslim back to Kenya where he's from." That's acting like a redneck. That is not civilized behavior. Now, if he had evidence for either of those, that would be interesting. But see, those sorts of attacks, that's not what Lincoln called listening to the better angels of our nature. So, but whoever's president, whoever's elected, neither party, we will work so hard to tear them down. I won't, but that's just the way the media works. Find any flaw. There's, I don't know if you heard the joke, President Obama's boating with the Pope in the middle of the lake, and the wind picks up, and the Pope's little hat flies off in the water. So the Pope says, "Can you help me with that?" And so President Obama gets up out of the boat, walks across the water, picks up the hat, walks back in the boat. Even the Pope is impressed with it. But the media on the side of the shore with a big telephoto lens looking at this, the headline in the newspaper the next day is, "Obama can't swim." You can find the negative in anything if you look hard enough. And see, we have spin meisters in Washington, oftentimes paid by industry. That's their job. And this goes back, there's a classic political book called All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren, the guy who spent time at Vanderbilt. And what was the theme of that book? Have y'all, is that required reading here? Find some dirt on the judge. Because even though the judge is about perfect, there's dirt on everybody. Because we're all human beings. And that's what Jack Burton went out to do. So this is an old story, and why do we like to replay these old tales all the time? To me, if you focus on the issues and on the merits and are relatively calm about it, it's much more educational. Yes, sir.
How do you think the death of Justice Scalia changed the trajectory of upcoming Supreme Court cases like the Fisher case?
How do I think the death of Justice Scalia changed the outcome of some particular cases? And you asked in particular about the Fisher case. You know, for a country that's pretty sensible, you know, one of the first jobs in business is called succession planning. And just think about it. This is one area of that's important to our lives, and we do deliberately no succession planning. Even though I think the average age on the Supreme Court now is over 79. It's widely expected that the new president will be able to put 2 or 3 people on the court. Can't we, as smart people, have some type of succession planning? Now, the Constitution handicaps us because it's life tenure during good behavior. And we've actually never interpreted the phrase during good behavior. But the instability, as I say, for us to shut down one of the 3 branches of government essentially for 3 years, it's not completely shut down, but the 4-4 time mechanism automatically gives a win to any appeal from a lower court, which one side prevailed. It's not really a decision-making body anymore. So I think there are several things that we could improve in our country, and I think this may be one of them, because a great nation cannot survive by shutting down one or more of its branches of government, because you could argue right now the Senate has been shut down for some time. You know, when we gave up the physical filibuster, like Strom Thurmond used to do, where you risk your bladder every time you tried to speak for more than 24 hours without going to the bathroom, you had skin in the game in that. Now, today, they have this rule, it's a technical filibuster. You send a staffer over there, give somebody a piece of paper, it has the same effect. None of this is in the Constitution. How is this right? It's just the prior practice. And I think we need rules that work better. Now, the status quo loves gridlock. But you could argue the Supreme Court now shut down. The Senate, at least, is shut down. The House is functioning, but it's highly partisan. And when we only schedule 54 days a year, like, why are you even paying our salaries? I'm the guy who got through the bill, no budget, no pay. If we didn't pass a budget on time, we didn't get paid. And that was a miracle. How do you get the most unpopular bill ever with my colleagues passed? Well, they were afraid of the public because they knew the public loved it. It passed both houses of Congress, and President Obama signed it into law. And guess what? That year, even the Senate passed a budget. They hadn't done that in 5 years. They'd forgotten how to pass a budget. And see, now I'm thinking we need to go further than that principle. And by the way, my bill, if they've adopted it entirely, was permanent. My Republican friends made it 1 year only. And they will not even countenance the idea of bringing it back up again. But why should we be paid if we only work 54 days a year? Or maybe we should be paid for a month or 2, but not all year long. But see, talk about an unpopular idea. But see, there are a lot of folks who think Congress basically shouldn't meet. And if the anti-Washington trend continues, pretty soon people will be elected to Congress on the platform of never visiting Washington, D.C., lest they be tainted by what happens in the nation's capital. I think the focus would be better put on why don't we get competent people to run for office, people that you might even trust making decisions on your behalf in the nation's capital. But there's very little emphasis put on that, and I don't want to fault my political science friends, because it's very hard to do qualitative judgments, but there's much more focus put on polling and rear view mirror stuff like that than on character and honesty and issues of that time. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier that Tennessee is one of the most conservative states. Do you fear that we might follow in the footsteps of some of these other conservative states that are trying to pass bills that allow for businesses to deny services based on religious and moral objections?
Well, one reason I'm pro-business is business tends to have a leavening effect on society. And American business has actually been a very progressive force when it came to civil rights and inclusion. Because see, they are interested in good HR, good employees, talented, capable employees, and they want them to come from wherever, sometimes even from home. And that has been a more balancing influence than you get at some of these wild rallies and things like that. States are sovereign in America. We are the United States of America, and that is not a joke. And Congress has limited power. But we depend on our states to be balanced. Now, some states have gone terribly wrong. Illinois, Louisiana, Rhode Island are some of the most corrupt states that are here. But generally speaking, Tennessee has been a sensible, solid state. But there are certain ironies here. You would think a conservative state would be less dependent on the federal government than other states, right? Well, it turns out that the most conservative states in America are the ones that are most dependent on the federal government. And you don't just look at the state level. If you go to the county level, the 10 most conservative counties in America are the biggest agricultural counties that are the most dependent counties in America on the federal government. So, again, I'm a fact-based person. If people just look at the facts, and you know, I'm happy to learn new facts every day. I try to always learn. It's amazing how nuanced your view of things will be. You'll be much less doctrinaire. You'll be hopefully much more practical, because the genius of America has been practicality. It's not been ideology. And one of the triumphs of political science professors in the 50s and 60s, they bemoaned the fact that the U.S. political parties were confused. You could find liberals and conservatives in both parties. So now our parties have become pure, like the political scientists wanted, and the result is gridlock. Because essentially we don't even have a Congress anymore. What we have is a parliament. Because a congressman votes with the party about 80% of the time, like I do. Most of my colleagues vote with the party 95 to 99% of the time. And all the comers, the ambitious ones, vote 99% of the time. And that means you don't have to ask them what their opinion is, because you can find out from their party leader, because they're going to do whatever the party leader says, even when the party leader does a 180. And see, a parliament without a prime minister is gridlock. And that's what we've got. So why do we have that? For the same reason I told you, two of the most popular presidential candidates today are the two most extreme senators in the U.S. Senate. So you have an entire voting record to look at, and people still love these guys. It's remarkable. If you want to get anything done, you won't pick either one of them. Sir?
Do you think that voting third party is a legitimate option, or do you think it's irresponsible?
Well, the genius of American politics has been the two-party system, not because either party is good or pure, but it sets up a sensible and limited competition. The European system of multi-parties can lead to chaos. And I don't know any folks who love math here. For anybody who really wants to understand democracy, you have to go back to something called the impossibility theorem, which is Kenneth Arrow in the 1950s. He won a Nobel Prize for this, and this is every kid's dream, because it's only like a 6 or 8 page paper. Like, who wouldn't want to win a Nobel Prize for a short paper? That's awesome. But it is very heavy duty stuff. But basically he proved that when you have a ballot with 3 or more choices on it, a binary voting system like we have cannot rationally order 3 or more choices. That's kind of a fundamental problem in the machine. Now, intensity voting could yield more accurate results. But see, we're so used to the old system, which we know from a Nobel Prize winner cannot work, that we, so a third-party system would make it impossible. That would put us in the impossibility theorem area. A two-party system, as flawed as they are, actually tends to cancel out that problem. And it's kind of a miracle that 200 years ago, somehow we fell into this solution. And don't ever assume falsely that party positions are stable. Like in the 1950s, the party that was best on civil rights and women's rights and the environment, hands down, was the Republican Party. Sometimes a sensible position is abandoned by both parties. Sometimes it's embraced by both. But if you understand history and you understand the slow turn of events, it's amazing, the reversals and double reversals. That's why a great leader like Winston Churchill switched party allegiances 2 or 3 times. And he was widely vilified for it at the time, but he was largely being consistent. Let's see, who hasn't asked a question yet? Because I don't want to shortchange anybody. Anybody who hasn't asked one yet? Okay, yes.
What do you think is the best way to make Americans more aware of the real facts?
What's the best way to make Americans more aware of the real facts? Well, first of all, any of you who are really brave, I have the best internship program in Washington, but it's harder than the Marines. Now, we don't do sit-ups and push-ups, but I make you read 2 books and write 2 good papers before you come, and I grade the papers, and I'm harder than any MBA or Vanderbilt or Harvard or Oxford grader. Because I really believe this thing, that we can't be number 1 unless folks like you are number 1. I don't want to pick on you, I don't know your ethnicity, but I once gave the New York Times English grammar test to all my interns. And the only kid who did well on the test was the Chinese kid. And that did more to put the fear of the Lord in the American kids, because finally they had a close up front example. Because when we don't even bother to learn our own language, how are we going to learn our own history? You know, we gave up on being multilingual years ago. This isn't true at MBA, but it's true across the state. 95% of Tennessee math teachers are not qualified to teach math. That's an essential part of brain development. And despite endless governors saying we're going to make education a priority, in this county, this last summer, they took one English teacher, forced her to be a math teacher in the fall, and they took one brand new coach, made him be a math teacher. And the one guaranteed result of that is the kids who have those teachers we're going to hate math. Because the body language, the whole vibe is going to be, they made me do it and I hate this subject. And that's the one thing the kids will learn. When there's never been a greater or easier opportunity. The books have never been better, but we're letting bookstores die. Newspapers weren't that great to begin with, but we're letting them die. You know, one of my favorite phrases is from Thomas Jefferson. He said, if given the choice between having newspapers without government or government without newspapers, he would unhesitatingly choose the former. The newspapers without government. And that's basically information without the red tape of bureaucracy. But see, we are the first generation in history to live Jefferson's nightmare because we have government now almost without newspapers. They hand out free copies of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, at Vanderbilt University every day, and the students won't even pick them up. A few kids will, but that is literally casting pearls before swine. You know, the tuition is what, $55,000, $60,000 a year, and it's handed to them, and they won't. It's not an assignment. You won't get extra credit. You know. And I'm an old-fashioned guy. It's great online, but it's even better when you open up the newspaper because your peripheral vision is so important, just like it is in sports. You're going to see a picture or a headline or a caption that will rock your world, and you didn't even know you were interested in it. So if you do a Google search, you're going to miss all that. So learning about the world is important. And the New York Times even starts the paper with the international section. You know, there used to be real news magazines in this country. My brothers and I would run home after school racing to get Time or Newsweek or USA News or World Report. Today you have to subscribe to The Economist to get a real news magazine because we have turned Time and Newsweek, to the extent they exist, into People magazine. Everything is People magazine. So we know about the sex lives of celebrities, and we don't know what's happening in our own government because it's not fun. You know, fun should not be the premier value that we celebrate. And rigorous schools like MBA are oases or havens or salvation when we have a chance to do better. Is that too preachy? Yes, sir. Way back.
Why are the food stamps and summer school lunches getting harder and harder to afford for people who can't afford them?
Why are food stamps and free school lunches getting harder and harder for people to afford? I think you need to check your data on that. During the most recent recession, food stamps, and it hasn't been called food stamps for about 15 years now. It's called SNAP now. Went from $40 billion a year to like $75 billion because it's a safety net program. When people are thrown out of work and they're poor, the government steps in and lets them eat. Now that's coming down as unemployment has fallen and people have jobs again. That's what it was intended to do. It wasn't supposed to be a hammock, it was supposed to be a safety net. With free and reduced school lunches, many people who are in public schools get that subsidy. And now it's not just lunch, it's also breakfast, because a shocking number of American parents, to the extent there are parents anymore, are not even feeding their kids breakfast. But those programs have never been larger than they are today. They are not shrinking at all, they're expanding like crazy. And in some schools, they've almost given up, because when 80–90% of your kids are on free and reduced lunch, it's not worth it to do the paperwork for the other 10%. Because certain transactions, the average price of a school lunch is like $2.80 or something like that. It costs more to collect the money from the kid then paperwork's his work. So this is one of the central challenges of society, and actually it's an interesting possibility for liberal conservative convergence. Because I mentioned earlier that George McGovern lost his race because one of the reasons was he said we should have a guaranteed minimum income in America. And that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like Hammock, end of society. But a conservative thinker called Charles Murray today, who wrote several path-breaking books, Losing Ground, Coming Apart, things like that, he actually thinks that probably George McGovern was right. Now, what possible argument would there be that crazy old George McGovern, super liberal, who lost 49 states, was right? Well, we just had the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. For anybody who kept up, we're spending 4 or 5 times more money today on the War on Poverty than it would take to lift everybody in America out of poverty. And yet the poverty rate has not gone down in the last 50 years. So what are we doing? Now, part of it is standard of living has increased. People have gone from a radio back then to now they have a flat screen TV and they're still poor. But part of it is the fact that so many of the programs to help poor people don't really help poor people. There are a lot of for-profit intermediaries out there that make a fortune trying to help poor people, and they do not care how inefficient they are. And they're taking most of the money. So Charles Murray actually believes, and this is a shocking idea, that if we actually gave poor people cash and let them fend for themselves, we could cut the safety net budget by as much as 80% and save all that money and actually achieve our goal of helping poor people. But see, our friends who are in healthcare, our friends who are in housing, our friends in other areas, we lose a lot of money in that. But that's an amazing thing, because rarely do you see a liberal conservative convergence. Sometimes on some libertarian issues you do, but this is kind of an amazing and shocking thing, kind of a fundamental relook at the way we've been doing things for half a century. I mentioned earlier, one of the terrible things about government is we never have a spring cleaning. We never look at the programs, see which ones work, which ones don't. We hate to prioritize them. But let me end on this note. One of the things I'm proudest of, I'm the only person in either the House or the Senate that ever got the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction plan up for a vote. Talked about it for years. All my colleagues did. It was big in the news. It was completely bipartisan. It was a $4 trillion plan. The only thing bipartisan enough and large enough to actually save us. And almost all my colleagues chickened out. 435 House members, only 38 were willing to vote for a plan like that. Now, they knew that we didn't have a chance to win, and a lot of folks chickened out then and said, oh, I'll be with you when it matters. But that was a big lost opportunity. And when things get worse, we're going to have another Simpson-Bowles type plan. And it's not going to be pretty, because the longer you wait, the worse the disease is and the harder the cure. So, huge lost opportunity. But we'll take more people with backbone, more people who are willing to stand up and say, hey, I'm not in this for the job. I'm in this to help my country. But that's going to take more elections like 2016, hopefully electing better people to the position. Thank you for letting me come. Remember, I gave you my cell phone number if you want to get in touch with me at other times, 714-1719. I'm about the only person in America who's done that. And also, I'm proud of the fact I think I have the only congressional office in America that's located in a public library. And that's awesome. Not only is it close to books and knowledge, you get free parking if you come visit. That's an amazing thing. So, thanks for